At press briefing. A very good afternoon to you, Samkele. Now, of course, I see what caught your attention in that press briefing was the issue of those suspended ANC officials in Limpopo, Mr. Dan Masiza, the Treasurer, and Florence Razelani, the Deputy Chairperson, who, of course, were implicated in VBS. Were you satisfied with the answer that you received when you asked about how, the ANC exonerated the two? Talk to us about this issue, because it does seem to be quite a sticking issue at the moment within the ANC, particularly in Limpopo.
Well, Flo, it's very surprising that the ANC would have kept these two particular individuals, Dan Masiza and Florence Razelani, on suspension for over 2 years without them going through a thorough disciplinary process of the African National Congress. We do know that they did appear before the Integrity Commission chaired by retired ANC veteran George Mashamba. That particular recommendation and report was placed before the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress virtually on Saturday and Sunday, and the ANC historically went the way that they've done even in the era of former President Jacob Zuma, in ignoring the recommendations of the Integrity Commission. They opted to ignore the recommendation that the two remain suspended until there's a criminal prosecution on this particular matter. The ANC opted to reinstate them with immediate effect in their positions, but that will only be implemented once the ANC's national officials, the president of the SG, the deputy president, the DSG, and treasurer and national chair, once they descend upon to the province of the North to communicate with the structures, alliance, and the affected people of Toando and Vembe, who lost their savings through the looting of this particular bank. But till this day, the treasurer of Limpopo, Dan Masiza, has threatened to take the great bank heist report of Advocate Matau as advocated for by Treasury on review. That has not yet happened, but the ANC is saying that they can't remain on suspension due to allegations, yet there's no criminal charges against them. Yet also, they've not gone through an internal disciplinary hearing within the African National Congress.
There was also the issue, and we saw some sort of press release regarding ANC staff members working in Luthuli House not having been paid. Was that touched on in the briefing? And really, what was said about it? It's quite embarrassing for the party and somewhat ironic, because you've got allegations of some in the ANC looting, and then people working within Luthuli House that were not paid money that's due to them. Was anything said regarding the way forward there?
At the press briefing, the ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule did not touch on the issues of salaries of staff at Luthuli House, but if with the letter that was sent out yesterday through the letterhead of the Secretary General of the ANC and the Managing Director or the General Manager Kubule, it does look as if the Secretary General of the ANC was consulted to somewhat on this particular matter and was abreast of it, but we did pose the question to him, and he said that this particular matter would be attended to by the Treasurer General of the ANC. That would be Paul Mashatila. But if you remember, Flo, this is not the first time that the ANC is facing an issue of its staff not yet being paid their salaries. A similar accordance happened in December when the staffers at Luthuli House were not paid their salaries. The president of the ANC had to step in and fundraise the money himself. Some say he even took it out of his own pocket. You do know that the president of the ANC has a very steep and deep pocket, so some say he paid the salaries himself in order to avoid the party of embarrassment of not paying the salaries. But the Treasurer General of the ANC at its January 8th celebration in Kimberley did speak to our very own Natasha Piri and say that the ANC's financial situation is in dire straits. But a former leader of the Youth League in press briefing last week said they were paid very well by the former Treasurer General of the ANC, that would be Matthew Sposa.
All right, I am going from different topic to different topic, but there were a lot of issues that were, of course, ironed out during the two-day meeting of the ANC NEC. So one of the major issues, of course, that they would have wanted to speak about today, but of course they got sidetracked by other issues that were brought forward by the likes of you, Samkele. The biggest issue, of course, is that of kickstarting the economy again, and proposals on how this will be done. Can you give us just a breakdown of what really was said with regards to this?
It does seem as if there is some relative unity between Luthuli House and the union building because Ace Magashule was very emphatic and very clear on his appraisals of President Cyril Ramaphosa, on how he's dealt particularly with the pandemic of COVID-19, on how government is very swift and has provided a unitary and a unified form of response to COVID-19. Also speaking at how President Cyril Ramaphosa was very straightforward and frank on the issue that it is infrastructure that's going to revive the ailing South African economy, which has further been broken down by this particular pandemic of COVID-19. ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule saying that it is infrastructure investment that's going to recover and revive the ailing economy, saying that they're also focusing on agriculture, focusing also on energy, and saying that nuclear has always been an ANC resolution and they'd be looking into that also in the future. But at this point in time, it's a massive infrastructure build project that's going to revive the economy, and also saying that they've noted the retrenchments that are taking place in state-owned enterprises, and companies, for instance, speaking about the SABC's plans to retrench about 600 of its staff, saying they are against this. This should be minimized to the best way possible. Also echoing and supporting the issue of the restructuring taking place at the South African Airways, with a new forming airline that's going to be there that will be restructured, saying that they support this, but they're also calling on private equity partners to come on board and minimize the jobs blockbust that will be taking place within the aviation industry in South Africa. Also saying that whichever private equity partner comes on board, they must know that the sole mandate of this new restructured airline will be a developmental agenda, just like all state-owned enterprise. But Luthuli House and the Union buildings are very clear that an infrastructure build project is the only way to revive the ailing South African economy that has been destroyed by COVID-19.
Now, I know that you've been keeping your eye on the 2022 elective conference. I saw you earlier on having a chat about that and anticipating that there would be some sort of conversation about that in 2 years' time. And of course, that'll be an interesting one to watch. What are you really anticipating? Look, it's in 2 years' time, but there's a lot that should come out of that elective conference in 2022, isn't there?
There should be a lot, not only at the 2022 conference, but also in the now postponed National General Council of the African National Congress. We do know that the ANC was supposed to go to its NGC between June, July. That was pushed to about September, August this year. That has now been postponed indefinitely. All branch general meetings of the ANC have been postponed indefinitely. All regional and provincial conferences, all of them have been postponed indefinitely, which ultimately has an impact on the ANC preparing for the 2021 general local government elections. You'd remember that with those local government elections, the ANC would need to go to branch general AGMs to elect various councillor representatives that would be one of the councillors for wards in the 2021 local government elections. That's now all been put aside. The various midterm review of the elected ANC leadership in 2017 at Nasrec, that has been pushed and postponed indefinitely. That is the NGC. So it ultimately tells you that the ANC is gearing itself up for the synchronization of both the national and the local government elections, as also spoken to by the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, which is the SG of the ANC, Ace Magashule, says they've also expressed a similar sentiment with them, and they would be approaching them to vote with them in the National Assembly in order to change the constitution to have one singular election which will encompass provincial, national and local, which will move away from the 2021 local government elections. But they say they will be guided for the 2021 elections by the IEC and the constitution. If the IEC opts to postpone these particular elections, which are supposed to take place next year for our local representatives, your councils, the PR councils, your mayors, that would be a great deal, but they will be guided by the constitution and the IEC, and that's saying that the only postponement that would only happen is if this COVID-19 pandemic continues to ravage South Africa and the world at large. Ace Magashule going at length in saying that since the opening up of the economy and more South Africans being out and about and going to their various destinations and workplaces, the mining industry opening up at 50%, the aviation industry now opening up domestically, that has increased the number of infections. One was even saying the number of infections that are rising in Gauteng is alarming, and in the next few days, Gauteng could overtake the Western Cape in terms of active cases of this particular pandemic of COVID-19. So COVID-19 could and has the potential to effectively postpone the 2021 2021 elections, which would pave the way to have one singular election in 2024 when we'd be going to the next general election.
And then there was, of course, the talk about the lifting of lockdown is up to government and scientists. And, of course, really seemed as though, the ruling party, the ANC, was sort of asserting itself after what we saw last week, where we saw the taxi industry, for example, kind of going, well, we're going to do what we want to do. Did you see that as the ANC kind of giving a sort of strong message out there that, that we're in charge of what will ultimately happen when it comes to lockdown regulations? Although we saw something particularly different last week when dealing with the Taxi Association.
What we effectively saw today is that there seems to be some sort of coherence and unity between the 6th floor of Luthuli House and the 10th floor, which is the office of the presidency and the union buildings. There seems to be a good working cordial relationship. The ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule was effectively asserting that the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress is in charge, but also listens to those that are deployed in government. But it also speaks to how the ANC is listening to its own deployees in government, particularly its own president, when it comes to the economic recovery of the South African economy. You've looked at the various resolutions that are taken by the ANC NEC. It's in collaboration and works hand in hand with the various resolutions that have been taken by the National Cabinet led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, especially on the issues of the economy, of the infrastructure build project. The million-dollar question, though, is whether the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, is on board this particular plane of the African National Congress that is trying to take off and recover the economy. It seems as if there may be some differing views here and there between Tito Mboweni, the Minister of Finance, and Luthuli House and President Cyril Ramaphosa. One may only look at how much will be spent or the budget will be, particularly for this infrastructure build project that government is embarking on to create long-term sustainable jobs for South Africans who may have lost some sort of employment and been ravished by this particular pandemic of COVID-19. But it does certainly look like the African National Congress and its own government are working hand in hand. For instance, if you look at the Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe Zulu, and the various comments that she had made on the issues of the social welfare grants that have been increased by government, and also the unemployment grant that is currently there with unemployed certificates who've got no form of income who are getting 150 rand. It works in collaboration with some of the proposals that were raised within the Peace and Stability Subcommittee of the African National Congress, and the one that looks particularly into social development of all South Africans.
All right, Samkele, thanks for your great and in-depth reporting as always. Of course, he was listening in on that ANC post-NEC meeting briefing, the ANC NEC having met last week for 2 days. And those are some of the major issues that were touched on this afternoon that Samkele helped us to dissect there. We'll bring you more news at the top of the hour. Do stay with us here on SA Today.